Hunger. Condition loosely defined as a negative outcome of continuous living on less than 1800 calories a day. This is a social condition that kills thousands every day. A condition that we once tried to resolve. We were so successful, we even put zero hunger as a target for the 2030 United Nations goals. The problem is, we were fighting hunger till hunger started winning. More and more people become food insecure and food banks are bending under strain. Global hunger is rising for the first time in decades. Meanwhile, over a third of all produced food is rotting in the garbage. So how did we end up in a world where the number of starving people increases daily, even in places with stable and abundant food access? Welcome, I'm Anna, and in this video we'll explore the luxury of not starving to death, and we will see how we can take back control over our own food. The position of food in our life is quite unique. Food is one of the three basic things that we require as animals to survive, either two being air and water. This is a biological necessity that nonetheless has been fully commodified into the systems of capitalist markets. More or less, you can find free water, and air is absolutely free. For now, but finding a consistent supply of free food outside of the capitalist market chain is pretty much impossible. Here you may object and say, Anna, but wait, what about charities, philanthropy, donations, food banks, and Mr. Beast giving out turkeys? Isn't it all free food? And the issue is, none of it is actually free. Philanthropy and donations of the corporations are paid off by labor that was stolen from the workers who used these charities and services in the first place. Food banks are working on support from local businesses and residents, and Mr. Beast turkeys are simply paid by his sponsors as a support for their public image. As soon as you touch the concept of free food, it crumbles into a pile of philanthropic bullshit. Under capitalism, nothing is free. Food today is not a right. It is not even a resource necessary for human life. It is instead a commodity. Ability to buy yourself a lunch, or even grow yourself a lunch for that matter, is a luxury. Just think of it, in the span of this video and every single day, every 10 seconds, one child dies of hunger. 25,000 people will starve to death today. Yet the quantity of food is definitely not one of our issues. With development of fertilizers and greenhouse horticulture, and of course now data analysis in agriculture, even climate change will not break our ability to grow enough food across the planet as a whole. Neither problem is our ability to distribute food. There is no place in the world today that would not be interconnected with the web of commercial routes on global and local scale. So how did we end up in a place where we can feed everyone, yet choose not to? For most of the modern human history, majority of people were either subsistence farmers or provisionaries, meaning that, like animals, majority of our labor would be centralized around our food. Our ancestors were growing food, finding food, making tools to optimize provisioning. They cooked, they processed and reprocessed byproducts of food in an endless cycle of food prep, just like gym bros every Sunday. That's not to say that they are starving. It's still just a common myth that people used to starve all the way until capitalism, but rather labor was guided by food. There was simply not that many other things to do. Even today, you can find plenty of subsistence farmers among more rural groups, but it was also very common among modern audiences. Homestead and simple living content is at all times high across social media. In a way, we see some romance in subsistence living, almost as if living on a farm can provide us an escape from anxious state of modern world. And I can very much relate to this dream of homestead. If you ask me what would be my personal dream life would look like, I would reply in the memory of Cicero that I just want a garden and a library, preferably somewhere along the coast of Mediterranean coastline. Though to be fair, a coastline seems to be getting closer by the day. Subsistence farming is viewed by us as a salvation from the curse of modern life. Though it really isn't. Curse of modern life will simply follow you into the homestead if you decide to get one. Even though it is true that subsistence economy was a thing for centuries, so was commodification of food. Commodification of food arguably is the primal and first form of commodification. Food is not just bought and sold, food quite literally is money. Barley is one of the first currencies that was widely used for trade. Through history, everything from rice to cocoa beans was used not just as a trade, but as a money itself. There is currently enough anthropological proof that commodification of food is not linked to barter system. It is instead linked to formation of power structures and hierarchies themselves. David Gerber did a lot of work on this topic, if you ever wonder, and his work mostly is available in public access. Roots of hunger are not just linked to industrial development or capitalism, but they are connected directly to the systems of oppression that exist in society in the most fundamental ways. Hunger is the mother of all struggle. Any of us today are familiar with scarcity fallacy, even though we are not often calling it by its true name. Scarcity fallacy refers to the long history of claims and social tropes that link famines to scarcity of resources. In older times, the myth of scarcity represented itself in arguments that justified war and slavery. It is a story of us versus them, fighting for resources, as if there was never enough for both to share. In more modern times, the idea of scarcity found home in Malthusian work on populational statistics. He basically argued in the 18th century that human population would grow exponentially and eventually outrun our ability to grow food. Of course, his arguments ended up being neither true nor scientific, but fear of poor people who will overbreed and consume all of our resources persists to this day. In modern day, same myth of scarcity penetrates our existence. Fear of immigrants and refugees, fear of social movements, and major opposition to governmental programs all are rooted in the same fear that there will simply not be enough resources for everybody to share. Scarcity lives in everything from Etsy storefronts that don't forget to remind us how many people already have an item in their cart, to alpha male internet culture that reminds us that men are in a constant competition with each other. We ought to always be convinced that there simply will not be enough trinkets, food, money, and vaginas to go around. Famines are often presented to us as a result of a singular catastrophic emergency that is leading to shortage of food in a uniform across the region. Shortage of food is then directly linked to death, criminal activity, and social unrest as if they are a cause and a result of each other. The issue is that this view on scarcity never really holds under examination. While it is true that shortages are created by emergencies, the range of negative effects is driven mostly by social factors. Unequal distribution of resources, class wars, and inadequate resource supply to more poor and marginalized communities all play a key role in formation of famines and shortages. GDP and the economy of 14th century Europe were restored within several years into the Great Famine, yet hunger and social unrest continued for the century. Britain was still exporting food out of Ireland during Irish potato famine, and there was no reason for the Horn of Africa to starve in 1980s other than the fact that no one really bothered about a bunch of poor black peasants dying of hunger in yet another concoction of civil and Cold War conflicts. There is certainly never an issue with deliveries of weapons in the areas of conflict, yet rice seems to be too much of a challenge. Scarcity and famines are, till this day, simply a result of systems that refuse to relocate food and resources to affected regions unless profit is involved. And finally, all of us actually get a ticket to the front seat of a new wave of famines. Climate change and COVID pandemic already severely affected people with lower access to resources right now. For the last couple of years, the number of people affected by hunger is rising. So is the number of people starving, dying from starvation, and suffering from malnourishment. Numbers are rising for the first time in decades. And 80% of the people who are food insecure today are living in the areas of high risk of environmental instability. And today, of course, we know that economy, market, and billionaires recovered quite well from the pandemic. Actually, rich did become richer. The poor, though, did become more poor. And it is going to get hotter. And it is going to get worse. Meanwhile, almost 1/3 of all the food that we grow worldwide is wasted. It is simply more profitable to throw food into the trash or convert it into biofuel than it is to feed people on the brink of death. Despite all the craziness of such idea, food is first of all a commodity to be traded, not a biological need to be fulfilled. Effects of the commodification of food chain go far beyond simply starving people to death. Simply starving people to death is not exactly a phrase that I expected myself to say today, but here we are. From soil erosion and deforestation to quite literally eating species into extinction, we do not just severely damage our well-being, but the well-being of the whole biosphere. Okay, go. Our farming concentrates on monoculture, in which agricultural varieties unconsciously compete in a capitalist market for the right to be planted. Corn, wheat, rice, and sugarcane are the obvious winners of the Anthropocene. Our obsession with yields and capitalist competition has direct effect on which plants and animals get to breed and which get to die. The goal of industrial farming is to find an ideal monoculture crop that is able to yield and harvest no matter of the weather, environmental factors, or amounts of applied pesticides. Yields of crops are increasing, but prices drop, placing farmers in the endless productivity race, requiring more harsh chemicals and treatments, more fertilizer, more soil erosion, and more advanced crops. There is over 1,000 varieties of banana, yet Cavendish typical banana at your grocery store are all clones of each other. This makes life of a banana and life of banana farmer extremely vulnerable to any sort of disease that can affect the plant. Roughly 500 million people depend on bananas for food and income. But if there is anything that capitalism learned from Irish potato famine, it's that poor people don't really matter when it comes to managing your profits. But perhaps none of the species are affected more by commodification of food than animals. In modern day, we roughly divided animals into 3 different categories. There are animal-like pets, like cats. Cats are our property. There are actual animals, like wolves, who are not supposed to be our property. And then there are things like chicken breasts, who are animal-based products. In our food chain, meat exists pretty much independent of an animal that is made of the said meat. And no, this is not a video that tries to convince you to go vegan. But the fact that even an attempt of making a connection between an animal and meat makes us angry and annoyed says something about our relationship with animals. Commodification of life and existence of an animal for pure consumerism makes us uncomfortable. It requires a justification to our cruel behavior. But if we look for justification, there is none other than our own hunger. Commodification of food shapes the world around us to an extreme extent that we often fail to realize. We do not know where our food is coming from, who grows it, who sells it, and what happens between the point of planting an apple tree and buying a numbered and barcoded apple in your supermarket. Or even better, you can completely dissociate yourself from any step of food production and food supply by simply opening an app on your phone.
And I guess at this point, a lot of you know that I like to garden and also that I like to cook. But what you might not know that I also work in food manufacturing. So while I understand the importance of sidewalk gardens and community gardens, I didn't exactly make this video to tell you that sidewalk gardens are the future salvation of the food networks. Let me explain.
More than a century ago, Kropotkin wrote A Conquest of Bread, otherwise known as The Bread Book, also available in free access. The title of the book, as the book itself, contributes to one of the Kropotkin's main ideas, that the primary question of any liberating movement is the question of bread. How do we build a world where no one ever goes hungry? And if there is a question that I wish answered, it is still the same one, the question of bread. In the world where food is often quite literally an equivalent of money, how do we breach past the centuries of harmful practices and preferably do so before we're forced to rethink our agriculture due to climate collapse? Often you may hear a suggestion to return to some forms of the traditional agriculture and land tending. We dream of food forests and intercrop gardens, free food for literally anybody, growing on the side of the street of Solarpunk City. And it is cool. I would much rather live in Solarpunk than in Cyberpunk, as I do right now. But as someone familiar with both intercrop gardening and manufacturing facilities, I simply cannot accept a level of delusion that is required to suggest that hunger can simply be addressed by sidewalk gardens alone. People often fail to realize the scope and complexity of modern food supply chain, or sometimes don't have exposure to life and produce outside of the industrial food supply. This chicken breast might as well be a chicken in the barn miles away from me less than a week ago, and oranges don't even grow in Canada, nor are they currently in season. And I think we often miss the point of the conversation surrounding hunger. It is not a conversation about gardening or food manufacturing, but a conversation about governance, about our labor power, and about our economies. As far as food remains a commodity that is bought and sold, there will always be a margin for a price increase and a profit to be squeezed. Oh well, stop at least. We still have an idea of decentralized gardening facilities that can provide food security beyond capitalism. Beyond capitalism we go, baby. And the thing is, we aren't really ready. This apple jam is made from crab apples, a decorative tree with apples. I picked those from the tree near my workplace to everybody's amusement except for maybe my Romanian co-worker. One of my first memories from early immigration days includes me standing in the university talking about something with a friend in front of the wild blackberry bushes. And I noted at some point that there were so many berries, and they noted that perhaps we should not be eating them because the berries are poisonous. Aha, I noted. Eventually, I stopped getting amused at the people who have no clue of what is or isn't edible beyond the shelf of a supermarket. Solarpunk city gardens do not require planting trees as much as they require planting ideas into people's heads. Ideas that food exists beyond supermarket, that food is made for sharing, and that food is a tool of connection rather than a tool of control. There is still an issue though. Garden is a field of uncertainty. Originally, I planned to grow pumpkins and all sorts of onions, but when the spring started, majority of my onions were attacked by onion fly, who destroyed all of my onions, and survivors still look pretty bad. And onion maggots that actually eat the onions from the ground up are untreatable without drenching soil in industrial-grade pesticides. I am lucky enough not to rely on my garden as a source of food, but rather as a source of entertainment and stress relief. Under conditions where one strongly depends on localized and immobile food networks, we aren't any better off than Irish potato farmers, where every season is a risk of losing crop and starving as a result. This is why, if we truly want to develop more secure food networks, we should think beyond capitalism, not backwards from capitalism.
And if we ever strive for automation for our workday, and computerization of agriculture may serve as our friends. I don't really dream of compulsory backbreaking farming labor. And well, who does? Behind community gardening and sidewalk gardens, we still ought to remember the original question: how do we build a world where nobody ever goes hungry?
Part of the problem, of course, is the issue of imagination. The argument that it is better to work an unethical or harmful job than to starve is standing only on the false dichotomy and lack of imagination, as if accepting status quo or dying of hunger are the only two options that should be on the table. Even in my own head, despite thinking about commodification of food for several years now, I hardly imagine how and where we can start to unravel this knot. But really, is the world of prosperity as difficult to imagine, or is this just another limitation of our imagination that we use to justify our current status of the world? From farmers to storefronts and anything in between of the ends of industrial food chain is still operated by people, by regular people, not different from me or you. And currently people that operate food networks don't have any say in their job. In reality, the only value that currently guides our food supply chains is profits of the shareholders and nothing else. Voting with your wallet is often suggested by proponents of existing systems as a way to incentivize ethical food production. We get labels like cruelty-free, organic, fair trade applied to packages. These labels make sure that those with enough money can buy chocolate bars free of child labor. Voting with your wallet provides an illusion of action, a solution that is accepted by shareholders and corporations alike. And a dysfunctional solution at that, which in the frame of capitalist system is supposed to hide another solution, the one that works so well that it terrifies corporations and shareholders. Most of the modern workplaces are ruled as monarchies or as totalitarian states. Decisions are made by executives and people have minimum bargaining power, often simply for their own paycheck. We once again accept such conditions as a given, a natural state of the world, just as people treated monarchy in the older times as a natural state of power. We may feel terrified by the idea of workers actually having a say in all of companies' operations. But imagine what the nobility thought about shoeless peasants who would be voting for their own government back in monarchy days. And that's, kids, a short story of why monarchy could not reform its way out of revolutions. But let us stay on the topic. Giving power to employees to change values of their own operations and their own company is the fastest route to change and reform our systems. I will not tell you here that I'm certain that people will step up and organize into unions and will start bargaining with capital beyond the needs of their paychecks. I won't promise you that unions will take responsibility in determining the practices and values of the corporations and businesses. Predicting future is at best foolish, but what I will tell you is that active cooperatives, unions, and community organizations remain to this day the fastest and the most useful tool of changing the world around us. Just recently, UPS had this historical win in wage increase and condition improvements for their drivers. And guess what? They didn't even have to go on a damn strike. We can only dream of a power of workers of corporations like Amazon or Mars if they go on synchronized international strikes. But these are the dreams worth dreaming. Anti-union propaganda that claim that unions are ineffective and workers are entitled and lazy is melting away like Greenland ice shield in July of 2023. That is to say, at historically high rate.
Power of labor by far remains the most extensive and powerful tool that we have at our disposal. And I say so because we do have a proven track record of labor arguing for their rights. We do have a really extensive proven track of unions, cooperatives, and communities standing up and building resistance based on their own labor. And I know currently comments like this seems to be a little bit delusional, and it is hard to imagine the world where unions and labor have enough power to wield power over corporations. But this is a world worth dreaming about. Things can change very quickly, and they did change before. So how do we build a world where nobody ever goes hungry? And I don't know the answer to this question, but I know at least one point where we can start, and it's not in the garden.
Thank you for watching and thank you for subscribing. I now have a TikTok. I'm not 100% sure yet to what I will be doing there, and also TikTok thinks that I'm still underage, so it doesn't allow me to post videos unless they are private. And I'm contemplating my outro, so for all the amazing people that watched that far, thank you and see you on the next one.